And we're back on the Build Phase live stream. Maybe I should come up with a name for this since it's not the podcast. All right, so a lot has happened in the last 6 days. We started Build Phase League 7, and the update stuff that Stacks and Bert were doing for Quarantine Cup 2 were an absolute highlight of the last several months when things have been tough, and things have been tough. I've really enjoyed being able to go back to those videos, listen to the analysis. So I thought, given how the players in the chat seem to really enjoy that content and how I myself have really enjoyed that content, that I would like to make more of an effort in this season of Build Phase League to give more frequent updates and talk about some of the matchups and stuff like that. Now, I don't want the podcast to become the league show during seasons, so I think maybe the live stream is a better fit for this kind of content. All right, so let's just dive right in. What we've got here on the screen is my current bracket, and I had not run a single elimination tournament before, and I certainly had not experienced one where there was just like open signups. Every single elimination event I've ever participated in was locked to 16 people, locked to 32 people, whatever the power of 4 is. So I was a little bewildered when I initially made this bracket, and we have this weird kind of split between rounds 1 and 2 where there's a bunch of players. It's filled in now, but if you look over on round 3, you can kind of see how there were players who didn't have a match in round 1 that had to play in round 2, and we kind of have the same thing playing out down here in the victory challenged brackets. So that kind of surprised me, and I think in the future, as a learning opportunity to try to figure out how to do these and do these kinds of seasons better, if we decide to do a single elimination event again, and that's actually a whole nother topic, is double versus single, but if we decide to do an elimination event again, and I think we probably will, because yes, these are early days and we'll see how it plays out once the whole event is concluded, but the first 6 days of this have been uniformly positive. The games have just been pouring in. People seem to really like the idea of let's get this going, and if I lose, I'm out, whatever. The grind of Quarantine Cup, while was an absolute blessing for me, particularly considering the time, like something to put my attention into other than just being scared for my parents, scared for my kids, scared for myself. It's been a year. So anyway, if we do another elimination event in the future, I think we might lock it to 16 players. And if you don't get there in time, sorry. Or if we don't lock it to 16 players, perhaps the players that get to skip round 1, that will be something you're awarded by performing well in a previous season. So it's something we could add to the prize support. I'm not going to guarantee that we're going to do, I'm not saying that Build Phase League is going to become single elimination from here on out. Not saying that at all. But preliminary feedback has been extremely positive. So I think this kind of event should happen again. I actually was working, and this has nothing to do with Build Phase, but I was actually working on an invitational tournament, trying to get a few high-profile names into a 4-person just an invitational event, basically exactly like this, a single elimination, but to try to kind of spinning off the Fight Night series, but trying to showcase high-level deck builders doing high-level deck building and deck playing. Unfortunately, right as I was getting ready to roll out that invitational, that's when the derecho hit Iowa. And for anybody who doesn't follow me on Facebook, and you don't need to, but we literally just got the last tree taken off of a house in my neighborhood. And I know Iowa City didn't even get nearly as hard as Cedar Rapids. So things, even 4 months later, are still pretty rough here. But I don't want to complain about the year. I want to dive into the matches. So that's why these brackets look a little bit weird, because we had 20 people, and rather than going 20 to 10 and 10 to 5, and in round 3 going, we have a number that doesn't work. That's this situation here. I suppose people who have played in single elimination events before are looking at my noobishness, not fully grasping how this bracket was going to be in advance, and rolling your eyes. Rightfully so. It's fine. So let's dive right into the matchups. So these first round matchups, any of these players that survive here will end up ultimately having one additional game played to get to the finals. So these first 8 players do have a little bit longer road, but the fail condition is still the same. So while you have one additional moment of risk, you have one additional game that you have to play, losing still puts you in a loser bracket. And I'm gonna touch on the victory deficient bracket for a moment. When I originally rolled this idea out, what I really wanted to do was single elimination. I like the idea of one mistake and it's all over, and that branding kind of spoke to me, like the high stakes of it, the pressure of it. However, I caved. There were players who said, well, couldn't we at least do a loser bracket, and then we could fight for third place, and while it doesn't ultimately affect the finals. So for any player who doesn't want to play these loser bracket rounds, you don't have to. The event was originally rolled out as single elimination. Maybe it's questioning whether it was a good choice or not for me to listen to the feedback of the players and change the format kind of midstream. We hadn't started yet, of course, but I announced it, and then in between the announcement and the actual posting of the bracket, we made it a double elimination event. So as I've said to any player who's approached me about it, if you don't like the idea of having to play these extra games, you don't have to. You can just concede your loser bracket match, and it treats the event as single elimination for you, and that's totally fine. I don't think there's anything wrong with players who feel that way about it, because I did kind of pull a little bit of a switch there. Ultimately, I think this format, while it doesn't have that same kind of poetic, high stakes, there can be only one kind of feel that a single elimination event does, I do think ultimately this is a little bit more player friendly, because I know, particularly with the format being Battles Royale, we have some new players, we have some people who this is their first competitive experience, and I like for those players to be able to get more than one game before they wash out, or potentially multiple games. Maybe one of our new players, that would be really cool if this format actually hit the target that Super Awesome Games seems to have laid out so effectively that a new player's first tournament experience, they could get all the way to the end against a roster that does have some killers in here. Like, let's not joke around. We've got former BPLP champions in here. We've got second place in Quarantine Cup 2. There's several people, many top eights, top 8 player. There's a high density of players who have quality tournament records, as well as some people who this is their first competitive experience. And these kinds of players being able to play together is one of the things I like about Versus so much. And this event being a low barrier to entry. I don't need to rehash all this. Let's just dive into the matchups. So we're going to start with round 1. I'm going to, for the purposes of today's stream, completely ignore the loser bracket. I will eventually go over all these matchups, but for today, I'm just going to focus on what's taking place in round 1 and 2. Now, as you can see, this particular round 1 matchup, I have not gotten a report for yet, or possibly if they did report it, I missed it in the Discord. There's been a lot going on, but I don't think this game has been played yet. So this match has prevented this bracket from being able to move forward, but we do already know that John is ultimately going to be the one facing off against the winner of Table 12. So let's start with Table 1. This is Diego versus Jamar. Let me pull up my matches here. So this was Black Cat versus Dutch. And we can see here that ultimately Diego pulled the victory. So let's look at this matchup just a little bit here. What Black Cat really wants to do is go second for sure. She needs more cards in her hand or she's not going to level up. And what Dutch wants to do is just kill stuff. Looking at this matchup, I think Black Cat is a kind of difficult character to pilot in the Battles Royale format, primarily because she needs a lot of stuff to work really well. Black Cat, to me, is a main character that absolutely begs for some kind of a combo, whereas Dutch is a let's get down and dirty and just fight. And their curves kind of reflect that. We have Wasp here. Now, while Wasp does have some combat applications, let's be real. This is a one drop that has always been, you slow down somebody with the -1 counter and then you slow them down again with the ability to shrink. So Wasp is not a character that's coming out and trying to put wounds on anything. Titania sticks to the board. Moonstone slows people down. Now, Megan here is misspelled, but Megan here is more, to me, a combat character selection than a combo character selection. And what I'm seeing here with this Megan, and especially with only 2, I don't think this would have been Jamar's primary 2-drop. I think this was a late game character that wanted to benefit off of a few of these You Wouldn't Likers coming down, some of these other characters getting counters out there. But there isn't a lot of counter production in the deck, which means I don't think Megan is ever going to get to be that big. And up here on Phoenix as the 7-drop, so this is the big bomb character in the deck. And while we have Dutch over here without a 7-drop, it doesn't, I don't think it matters. This 7-drop is not, Phoenix is not doing a lot of work. She has the ability to prevent attacks from going through, but that is going to be throttled by the amount of yellow resources that they have in the deck. And Black Cat also, right? Black Cat uses yellow? Maybe I should have looked up these cards before I started talking. So all in all, I see Black Cat as being a deck that wants to chip away at the opponent's hand and try to win by preventing your opponent's powerful cards from hitting the board. Because once they hit the board, there's not a lot here to do with them. All of these cards on Jamar's side of the deck are cards that let you draw the game out, let you frustrate your opponent. And the fact is, I think given the results of this, given the results of this match, we can see that ultimately Diego did come out on top. And I think the power of the plot twists, being able to turn stuff off when you're sending attacks in, and this team attack with Hawkins. Anna is an additional power activator for Dutch, and Dutch's powers are quite good. Everything in this deck just says turn right, smash face, and to me, Black Cat just doesn't have the durability to survive that given the limited number of tools that are available. So this is probably not a great matchup for Jamar. I'm sure he probably knew that going in, but such is life. Okay, moving on to David versus Vern. Now, we are still in these round 1 matchups where these are all the people that have to win that one extra time to actually be able to make it into the finals. So let's start with Vern here. Quake is a quality main character. Arguably the best main character on the Shield team, although I think the Phil Coulson main character shows some promise, but he's not part of the original box, so being a crossover card, that main character isn't legal. So maybe what I should say is this is probably the best Shield main character that's legal in the Battles Royale format. Unwavering Loyalty is certainly... So here's the thing. If you're going to build a loyal deck, I feel like it wasn't Unwavering Loyalty, it was Stand Together that pushed those loyalty decks over the top into actual playability, actual viability range. So Unwavering Loyalty is a great plot twist. In fact, both of these plot twists are quite strong. The problem with the Shield box is a lot of the characters themselves have pretty weak stats. So you're playing these characters that have the ability to shuffle through your deck and get to other useful cards, which is important because at the top end, Iron Man and Hawkeye are actually quality drops. And Phil Coulson coming down is going to allow your characters to be able to get stealthy into the back row. Iron Man can fly. So there are some quality drops here at the top, but you've got to get these agents to stick or else the deck filtration gets worse. Since Quake herself isn't an agent, you need Sharon Carter to stick or Fitzsimmons to stick to be able to go deep enough into your cards for that agent keyword to really click. And while Quake herself is a decent main character, I don't know that she's going to be able to body block everything that's coming her way. Now, if we look at the results here, we can see that ultimately Quake did survive. So my kind of nitpicking at, and I guess I should be clear, I am not second guessing any of the choices any of these players made. I haven't tested Battles Royale very much. I've played it a little bit with my kid, but I have not brought any Battles Royale stuff to my testing group. My group as a whole has been kind of in off season since Quarantine Cup 2 ended, and I think we're going to skip over Battles Royale and jump straight into the Benchwarmers format. So I'm not trying to say that I have better understanding or better information than any of these players as far as how their decks are built. This is just different things work for different people. There's decks that work quite well that I wouldn't play or that I would build differently. So I don't want anybody to take this as me taking shots at them, because that's not how I intend to come off. So let's hop over here to David's Mayor Wilkins deck. This is the first photographic guide that we've seen so far, and I will say that out of the photographic boxes, I kind of thought that the MCU Battles was the only one that really had game, although I do admit a 30-30 main character is pretty good. So we have kind of a typical selection of, well, typical, this is an atypical format, but we have kind of expected cards coming out of this box. Life on the Hellmouth and Dissolution Spell are probably the two best plot twists in the Buffy Battles box. I am a little surprised to see only 3 Buffys and such a small number of locations. For my money, if I'm going to play in the Buffy Battles box, I would want 4 of Buffy, a ton of locations, and a bunch of that Chosen One plot twist, so my turn 5 play could potentially take out 2 or maybe even 3 opposing characters and really let me jump ahead on that turn 5. Now, it looks like David wanted to play it a little bit safer. Cordelia is interesting because there's not a ton of counter generation stuff happening in here that would let her. Now, does she get her stuff off just counters or off power-ups? I don't remember the phrasing on Cordelia. I feel like she's power-up triggered. I don't know. Some of these cards I clearly haven't played in a while. But it seems like if you have a card that's going to benefit from putting +1 counters on other guys on your side, you might want to go a little heavier on some of your primary drops to, instead of splitting across Angel and Angelus, like do all of one. So that way you've got those extra power-ups and you can maybe squeeze a little bit of Cordelia value out of there. Although ultimately, if you have a 30-30, might not be a concern. So Vern ended up taking this match with Quake versus Mayor Wilkins. So let's hop down here to Marcellus versus Jose. So we've got Ghost 200. I guess that's his deck name. So we've got Ghost here. Only 1 Falcon drone. So that Falcon drone must be for Falconer, but only 1 Falconer? Huh, I guess Keys does give you a little bit more utility. So Ghost as a main character wants to hide. This guy's going to tuck and pass. That's kind of his deal. So the idea that you would have Keys here to change a character's... so Keys does 2 things. He can freeze a guy, and he can let you change... I guess it makes it so you can use any color power symbol to pay for something. So if what you want to do with Ghost is make sure that you can hide, Keys does seem like a stronger choice than Falconer. Although, in general, I feel like if Ghost is hiding, what you want to do is apply pressure with your board. So I'm a little surprised not to see more Falconer. That's a great 4-drop. Arguably the best in a vacuum 4-drop in the Predator Battles box, although again, Keys serves some very specific, efficient purposes. Primeval Hunter is no surprise. Lambert is no surprise. Hellhound, come on, man. I hate that card. And Jungle Hunter, I think, is no surprise. Although, if it was me, I probably would have gone for Jungle Hunter and rolled less Dutch. But, again, personal preference. Very powerful plot twists in here. I'm a little surprised we don't see more of the Prey plot twists. Things like Death Trap I thought would be extremely good in this format. Jose is on Dr. Doom. Of course, he's got his invention pile down here. And as we go through these decks, you'll see some of the people submitted their inventions kind of just smushed together with the rest of the deck, and some people broke them apart. But we know what inventions are. Observe and Adapt is an interesting choice here in Jose's deck, because this is fully focused on being able to use something of your opponent's against you. And when you're playing against guys that have turnaround anytime, that have these powerful, any of the Prey plot twists, although maybe Soup Happens might not be the most awesome card to steal because it's kind of narrow in its application points. But I'd like to see Observe and Adapt hit the table more and be played more. But part of the problem I think we're seeing is over time, while Super Awesome Games has given us better and better plot twists, they've also given us better and better supporting characters that do things that don't require a location. So non-superpower characters, which has, I think, lessened the overall value of plot twists in general. So where once upon a time in the game, something like Even the Odds could absolutely decide a game, well, now we have characters that kind of do the same power, and it's attached to a body. So I think plot twists, while they have gotten better, I think the utility value on the supporting characters has gotten better at a faster rate, and thus has put pressure on players to run fewer plot twists. Now, this isn't true of every deck, of course. Something like Dark Willow is still going to want to pack all the plot twists in, but it bums me out because I would like Observe and Adapt to be a real gotcha bomb card. I want to play that card, and I want to take something of my opponents and just make them feel bad because I'm using it against them, and I'm not sure that that is going to get there. So Alicia Masters clearly is... I don't think he wants to play Alicia Masters on turn 1 because I think that clearly is here for his Torch, Visible Woman thing later game. And the Super Scrolls, I think, are probably in here to benefit from his own Fantastic Four plays. Impossible Man makes a lot of sense. Oh, and with Doctor Doom being who Doctor Doom is, I think having the extra plot twists, even if you have to just dump them empty, which I had to do during the first look stream against Stacks, this Fantastic Battles box is a real struggle for, in particular, Doctor Doom, because there are so few playable plot twists, and there is no playable equipment outside of Impossible Man or Inventing. So I think Jose maybe chose himself an uphill battle with Doctor Doom when he's limited entirely to the Battles box. Still a big fan of that character, big fan of the box, but unfortunately Fantastic Four, as has been said many, many times, did not end up being the jumping on place for new players that we were hoping it was. So ultimately Marcellus ended up taking that, which, just kind of looking at how these decks stack up and how difficult Doctor Doom's level up condition would be, I can't say that I'm surprised that the bounce went Marcellus's direction here. Moving on. Now, this particular matchup is near and dear to my heart because both of these guys are patrons of the podcast. If you like what we do, patreon.com/thebuildphase. We've got Obs here on Emma Frost, which to me felt like a fairly playable character. So Emma Frost has some problems, but a lot of these characters all have problems because of how limited the Battles Royale format is. So if there was gonna be a time when Emma Frost could really come down and do some stuff, it feels like this format might be the time. Now, she does lose some of her cooler tools that came out in the in the issue boxes for this story arc, but there's still a lot of good stuff in that Utopia Battles. Match in particular is, you cannot overstate how good Match is. And if you can get the Cloak and Dagger combo going, that can really spell doom for some people. Ares on turn 7 is just an absolute beat stick. Domino is so good. If it was me, I probably would have run 4 Domino in here just because of how good that character is. And I'm a little bit less gung-ho on like Cloak and Dagger, any of those disputed loyalties, conflicting whatever the keyword is that lets your opponent steal your character just for having somebody of the right affiliation in play. I get that most of the time that isn't going to be relevant, but I hate the idea of playing a card and my opponent gaining all the benefit from it. So I'm a little lukewarm on these guys, but given the format, I think it's a safer play than if you were, like, say, going in Children of the Atom. You can't play any of those conflicted loyalties or uncertain loyalty, whatever that keyword is that, again, lets the opponent steal your character. You can't play those in the X-Men format. Jason's deck here, we got Ronin, which is another Photographic Universe card. We, again, haven't seen a lot of Photographic Universe. I was expecting, when I started thinking about this format and in terms of how I would test for it, right at the top of my list was MCU battles. I think we start with the photographic cards because everybody's limited. Let's start with the cards that we know have a little bit more juice for the squeeze, a little bit more stats, a little bit more powerful abilities, a little bit easier to access, although smaller card pool. But again, Battles Royale, everybody has a smaller card pool. Friend from work makes all the sense. Kind of would have thought Sokovia Accords could have been a more... I guess you have to kind of think about how many decks are going to be trying to run away with counters. So maybe Sokovia Accords isn't the most crucial. I think Two More Grow in its place is maybe one of the best photographic plot twists. I get to play a thing. Hopefully my attack gets big enough that I can strike you back, and then I get to draw 2 cards. Oh, that's great. So it replaces itself +1, and maybe I get a stun out of it too. I love Two More Grow in its place. That's one of those kind of auto-play plot twists that I put into everything. Killian, if you get the greens early, is unbelievable. He's basically a might makes right. Whiplash can tear up your opponent's row. Black Widow can disrupt their hand. There's a lot of good things going on in here. Crossbones, when this guy got spoiled, I was all in. I thought this was a great card. And over time, I have become less into Crossbones because there are times where you don't need a big body to hit the main character. You need a big body to deal with the board. And he can't do both. And that limiting factor has proven very frustrating to me in a number of games. So I do know that this game ultimately went to a double KO. So it was very close. And Obbs was the one who was priority player at the time of the double KO. So he's going to be the one who moves forward and is going to have to fight Dan versus Diego. Now, Dan, we haven't looked at his deck yet because he hasn't played. Diego, we started off with that. Okay, next matchup. We're going to move down here to another Patreon of the podcast, Justin Parrow, versus Vern. So this is Vern's second appearance today because he made it out of this round 1 grinder, and unfortunately he comes up short in his round 2 match. Now, I do not know the details on how this played out. I don't know if what he's trying to go for here is actually hitting the Supreme Leader, kind of, it's not really an alt win condition, but the alt not lose condition. Given the makeup of his curve, it does seem like what he wants to do is level up Supreme Leader and then kind of heal. Now, I get that it's not a real heal. You're not actually taking wounds off of Supreme Leader, but what are all the characters that make it so he can't lose? Hive, Kraken, Madam Hydra, Strucker, Faustus. Is that all? And is Gorgon one of them? So basically his whole curve, if he can get anybody out there, like Arnim Zola is +1 hit point. So it's like healing the main character for 1. Even if you kill his main character, if there's an Arnim Zola on the board, you don't win the game because you have to deal with him. Unwavering Loyalty makes another appearance. I think a lot of the people who chose Shield versus Hydra as their box, probably this plot twist had something to do with it because Unwavering Loyalty is quite good. Also, Shield versus Hydra is the only box that's going to give you access to Nullifier, and you can see here Vern has Serpent Crown, which, again, I think is a fantastic card, particularly in this format, where people aren't going to be able to fix their draws, people aren't going to be able to necessarily dig to multiple answers and be able to just chain threats together turn after turn. Stealing somebody's big threat could steal you the game. I don't have the exact details on how basically any of these games played out, but my assumption here is that Supreme Leader simply was able to outlast Quake. There's only so many locations and so many plot twists in the game, and this curve just is not as punchy and vicious as this curve, unfortunately. So I think Vern was a victim of his matchup here in round 2. Moving on to Seth Viola, Quarantine Cup. Was he top 4? Definitely top 8 in Quarantine Cup 1. I don't remember ultimately where Seth ended up in that, and Mitch came in second in Quarantine Cup 2. So we got a couple of high-level players here, and let's scroll down. So this is Seth with Mayor Wilkins. So that's our second Mayor Wilkins deck, and Mitch with Captain America Cinematic. Now, right after signups close, Burt Richardson got a hold of me and said, how many people played Captain America? Because I think he was curious if his making Captain America, what was it called? Adventures with Cap? Whatever his 3 podcast series was about how to build a quality deck with Captain America in this Battles Royale format. I think he was a little concerned that he might warp the meta. That people would go, oh, hey, this problem's already been solved. I'm just going to take this deck that a prominent deck builder has already come up with, and I'm going to play that. Well, Mitch was the only one who played Captain America, and I am certainly not going to assert that he just copied anything from Bert. Mitch is quite a capable deck builder entirely on his own, and I will say, if I was going to play in a Battles Royale event, Captain America out of the MCU Battles box would be absolutely where I started. That would be my first step, without a doubt. Possibly Mr. Fantastic out of the Fantastic Battles box would have been kind of my number 2. So that's my opinion as far as how these stack up. So Seth's Mayor Wilkins here. So it looks like his curve is reversed, which shouldn't be that difficult for me to read, but kind of is. Sweet, I think, is an interesting inclusion here on turn 5. So for people who aren't familiar, what Sweet does is moves every character to the front row and makes them do a musical number. The musical number is not relevant. The moving everybody to the front row is. Particularly, if you notice, Sweet is going to come down on turn 5, which is the 5 where your mayor, or the turn where your Mayor Wilkins turns into a 30-30. So being able to yank all of your opponent's guys up front and then crash into them with your newly inflated Mayor Wilkins seems pretty good. Again, Life on the Hellmouth, Dissolution Spell, these plot twists showing up make all the sense. Slayage surprises me a little bit. So I guess the thinking is you want to give a character Slayer so that you can get some stuff off the board. So you want to run into evil characters, which unfortunately Mitch's list does not line up feeding evil characters to be slain. Spike is powerful. Anya is, I think, a deeply underrated card. This is basically like the ego effect, but it only lasts for one turn. But sometimes one turn is all you need. So I think there's some good stuff here, but ultimately I think Seth probably suffers from the kind of limited options that are in the Buffy Battles box, and the fact that probably his best plot twist is off team for his main character. So he's got to get one of these supporting characters to stick, and his curve is not completely packed with I can't think of the team name, the Buffy team, Scoobies. His curve is not that densely packed with Scoobies. Yeah, there are some there, but I mean, this is a big deal spell. Especially, if somebody can get big enough to hit your 30-30, you need bailouts, which I think stuff like Big Bad kind of feeds into. Vampiric Hypnosis. There is a theme here of Seth being able to yank characters out of the back row and force those wounds through, which I think is really smart. That makes a lot of sense. The strategy is solid. It's just unfortunate that I think his matchup here, I think he's a victim of his matchup, much like Vern and Justin that we just talked about. So moving into Captain America. Now this Peggy Carter of course you're going to play whatever the one of is that corresponds with your main character if you're in that MCU Battles box. These cards are so swingy and so annoying. They are just so powerful. And yes, they're one of, so that's a limiting factor, but I've said many times on the show that I don't think giving a card a broken power and then limiting it to one of a kind is all that effective of a balancing technique, because in the games where you play that Peggy Carter on turn 1, it doesn't feel balanced at all. And the fact that maybe you don't play her on turn 1 the next 5 games doesn't at all change the play experience of the player who had to deal with this extremely powerful turn 1 play. And I kind of feel that way about all the one of SCs that are tied to a main character. So there's a Doctor Strange one, a Thor one, an Iron Man one. It doesn't matter. I don't remember all of them, but they all are very impactful and pretty annoying when your opponent pulls them on turn 1. Now, I don't know if Mitch did that here, but just my personal preference is, I mean, you got to play those cards, but I'm not a giant fan of how they affect game balance overall in the big picture. So this Captain America deck, it wants to turn sideways, man. You've got your combat buff, combat cancel power here. You have the ability to not take wounds when you get stunned. Captain America himself can generate additional counters. I really like seeing the one of Mandarin. I have for a long time talked about how this 2-drop does not get enough respect in photographic. Yes, if you play him and you get Trevor Slattery, that does suck. But if that's the situation, you're just getting what you paid for. You're getting a 2-drop of stats with the chance of getting a giant power spike or nothing, one of the two. And I'm okay with getting a 2-drop for the cost of 2 that has a 50, well, I guess not 50-50. It has a 1/3 shot of a giant power burst, or I just got what I paid for. Great card. I don't think Mandarin gets played enough. Heimdall surprises me a little bit because he himself can't get in and fight and do stuff. And you can't have Bifrost in this format, so he's only there as a tutor. But I guess the thinking is if you get your Captain America big enough, you can have Heimdall hide in the back row, and then he can fix your curve, and you don't necessarily have to play and use Heimdall in the same turn because you can set up in such a way that you can actually protect him. Ultimately, Mitch prevailed in this, so it's going to be Mitch versus Justin in round 3. I'll deal with round 3 matchups when we get to round 3, but I'm not gonna break my stride right now. So Giuseppe, so this is our second appearance of Quake, and this is the second appearance of Ghost, but it's the same, or in today's recap, but this is the same player. So again, my analysis of Marcellus's deck doesn't change a whole lot. This Quake deck, oh man, everything's all mixed together. So I like seeing the Book of Vishanti show up, especially considering how limited players' options are going to be because of, again, the format. I feel like I'm saying that a lot, but it's true. Vishanti being able to cancel an opponent's plot twist could be very impactful. Agent Carter, Fitzsimmons. Interesting that Maria Hill is in here. Now, Maria Hill could remove a really problematic character and get him out of the way, but if you replace them with a Jungle Hunter on turn 3 or 4, that could be devastating. So I've always found Maria Hill to be a card that you only play in very narrow, specific circumstances, because late game it can be great. You could replace a Jungle Hunter with one of these any other cards, and it's guaranteed to be worse. But the earlier in the game you try to activate that Maria Hill, the more dangerous it is. If it was me, I probably would have gone for Coulson because I value his ability to give my whole team stealth over Maria Hill's ability to pseudo remove a threat and potentially replace it with another threat. Quinjets make sense. Plasma cannons make sense. Unwavering Loyalty. Again, every time we see this shield box, we're seeing Unwavering Loyalty plus Strategic Homeland. So we've got a solid set of plot twists, and we got a bunch of guys that later in the game want to turn. Now, notably, this Quake deck has Serpent Crown, whereas if I recall correctly, our other Quake deck... No, he did run Serpent Crown. It's Justin that didn't run the Serpent Crown in there. So I think that, again, makes sense. Nullifiers, Serpent Crowns, these things could definitely have a greater impact in this format than they do in other formats. So solid build, and ultimately Giuseppe ends up taking it, so he's going to be facing Earl in round 3. All right, next matchup, Roland versus Earl. Now, Roland, I want to give a little shout out to the resourcerow.com. It is the resourcerow.com, right? Whatever the URL is specifically, Roland has been doing a series of articles under the name The Resource Row, and they're hilarious. It's from the perspective of various characters from the Marvel universe kind of all hanging out, talking about cards, talking about their cards. It's funny. I've enjoyed all of these, and it's always nice to have more versus content in the world. There just simply is not enough versus content out there for my taste. I often find myself watching the same video more than once or listening to the same podcast more than once. Just it's been a year, guys. So hopping in, Bark Monster, Bark Creature. Now, if I was going to build a Battles Royale box out of the X-Men box, this is probably where I would start. I would start with the Bark Creatures. I would run the Lone Gunman package. Let's see, only 3 I Need Your Helps. Interesting. Now, see, I consider I Need Your Help to be like a lock 4 of if you're running the gunman package, but he's only got the 3 there. Baby William, I don't remember what that one does. Deep Throat gets the hand revealed and takes care of supporting characters. I cannot remember what Baby William does. Expect the Unexpected is just a fantastic plot twist. It's a powerhouse. Unfortunately, you can't play it on your main characters. I mean, you can play it in its defense mode on your main characters, but you can't use that as an attack pump on your main character because it will stun them, given their 4/4 stat block. I like seeing Phyllis Paddock show up. A little surprised Aaron Starkey, but I guess he's got some utility, and you can more or less feel safe that your opponent isn't going to be running this card right here that Earl was. So that's an unfortunate matchup for Roland. I don't think you run Starkey. I think if you get the idea that your opponent might have Seraphim, you just don't play Starkey. And since these are open lists, I bet Earl didn't want to play Seraphim and Roland didn't want to play Starkey because you don't want to give your opponent a free card in hand. Maybe there's a situation where, hey, I get it out on this turn. That's great. And it doesn't matter that my opponent gets to search for something. I just need the body now. But that's definitely something you want to keep in your mind when you're going into this kind of matchup with an open deck list. Fluke Man, it's just 3 Fluke Man? 3? I don't know. I see some of these cards like Fluke Man, I would run as a 4. Fox Mulder, I would probably also want as a 3 or 4 of, given the format, because if you can go in and strip out your opponent's top deck, their biggest threats, you can just win off of that. Now you have to get there, but so excellent choices. I like what Roland's doing with this deck. There are a few places where I feel like if I was piloting it, I would adjust the numbers a little bit, but as far as the characters that are being played, I think we got something good going on here. I'm not sure that the not losing the game Golem condition, like what alt win conditions are we worried about in the Battle Royals format? I guess Supreme Leader. No, Supreme Leader doesn't win. He just doesn't lose. I guess maybe if your main characters get stunned off, you've still got the ability to hang in the game. So Golem's a good card. I just generally when I put him into decks, it's specifically because I'm worried about some kind of alt win thing that my opponent might do, and that's in there as a speed bump for them to have to deal with. Krychek MC. Okay. Again, we've got the complete Lone Gunman package, but no, I Need Your Help. Interesting. So that I don't fully understand. I think if I'm going to run Lone Gunman, I'm not running the newsletter. Although that's a playable plot twist. It's good. It kind of works like the Book of Ashanti does. It inhibits your opponent's ability to do what they want to do in response to combat. That's quality. Does it also put a -1 or a +1? Maybe I'm confusing it with Soup Happens. Crew Cut Man, this guy has not worked out for me, but he says draw a card on him, so I don't mind that at all. Super Soldiers are great. Phyllis, again, is a great card. Fox Mulder at 3 of, I think, makes sense. This Seraphim, I bet that doesn't hit the board in this matchup because you don't want to give your opponent a free Starkey. And I think probably in the end, let's see, I know this has already been reported. Earl did end up taking this matchup. So I'm a little curious how this matchup went down. Because if I'm just looking at these 2 lists, I feel like the Bark creatures have kind of the advantage as far as just running Krychek down to the ground and getting the wounds stacked early. Maybe the draws didn't shake up, or I suspect this matchup actually hinges on who gets the most Langleys and other Lone Gunman activators early in the game. Because if I get a Frohickey on one and I got 2 or 3 Langleys in my hand and I can just decimate your whole hand before you even get to play a resource, that could easily decide the game. Don't know that this matchup went that way, but that's kind of how I see it. I would put Bark creatures as being favored going into it, but obviously they didn't come out on top, so I'm a little curious exactly how this matchup played out. Abduction. Underrated card. I think this Abduction... The problem with Abduction is that the rest of the team feels kind of weak, so you're unlikely to play cards that activate Abduction. But if you are playing cards that activate Abduction, I think this card's underrated. All right, so we're going to skip table 12 here because we have not gotten the results from table 4 yet, so we don't know who Ogre is going to end up fighting in Ralph versus Kendall, and we're going to jump straight down to John Viola versus James Monroe. Now, these guys are old hands at the online tournament scene. They both played in a bunch of different events and generally do pretty well. I mean, we all have our ups and our downs, but these are two respected, legit players with excellent tournament records in general. And we've got a fantastic 4 battle here. So we've got Invisible Woman versus Human Torch. Now, the first thing I'm curious about is, yeah, neither one of them, it looks like, opted to include any plot twists, which is not surprising because the Fantastic Four doesn't have any plot twists, and the plot twists that are available for Frightful in the base box are unfortunately not that great. Yes, Impossible Man does count as kind of a plot twist / equipment. You don't ever want to have to recruit that guy as your target 6-drop, but still. Oh, got a typo there. So here in James's list, you can see that we've got our, oh, he does have a plot twist. It's just in a confusing location. We've got our invention deck. Been a long day already. We got our invention deck kind of smushed in with the rest of the deck, so just set that stuff aside. Super Skrull on both sides, Doctor Doom on both sides, but this Super Skrull on both sides, man, you guys, this matchup may very well have come down to who could stick a Super Skrull to the board and just start smashing with it first. I do think, in general, John is favored in this matchup because Human Torch just comes out so much harder and heavier than Invisible Woman does. Now, if James got the draws to be able to draw into, looks like he didn't draw into hiding and tuck and pass, so John doesn't have anything to do with all of his strength, to quote The Dark Knight. I could see Invisible Woman surviving this beatdown from her brother, but ultimately it's going to come down to Human Torch needs fewer activators to be able to do what he wants to do, to be able to stack wounds. If you get 1 blue and 1 Alicia, Human Torch is probably pretty good until like turn 4, turn 5, in terms of just smashing in there and getting work done. Whereas Invisible Woman, you need to draw yellows and supporting characters. So you got to get a character out on the board, and you need yellow to activate so you can hide in order for her to level up. And if that doesn't happen, it's going to be a bloodbath. Don't know the specifics of how this matchup played out, but that's, looking at the list, that's the way I envision it. I see Invisible Woman having kind of a difficult time holding the board if Human Torch has even a fair draw, like a middling draw from Human Torch, is probably still going to be able to run Invisible Woman down unless she draws the absolute nuts. And I think that is our last matchup. Am I right? Yep, that's the end of my list. So going back over here to the bracket, we are looking at Giuseppe versus Earl, and that is going to give us Krychek versus Quake. So I think it comes down to Lone Gunman. I think if Earl draws a bunch of Lone Gunmen early in the game, Quake could be on the back foot and could be in pretty rough shape, especially with his ability to get Fox Mulder down later in the game and maybe nuke the Iron Man or nuke the Hawkeye out of Giuseppe's deck. Now, Serpent Crown, I mean, you could end up having your Fox Mulder used against you. Does he have the right colors here? No, it doesn't look like he's got the right colors, so I guess he would not be able to use his Fox Mulder against him, but still, you steal it. I think if I had to choose, I would maybe say that I think Quake is favored in this matchup. Maybe. The general quality of the attack that Krychek is going to be able to put on the board, like Super Soldiers is good for a couple wounds on something, Scully can heal something. It seems like he's got a little bit more staying power than Quake, but Unwavering Loyalty, Strategic Homeland, the ability to cycle the deck, Vishanti turning off one of your opponent's plot twists, it definitely feels closer. Generally, when I look at photographic versus illustrated, I kind of just break down, well, where are the stats? Where's the breakpoint on the stats? And if the photographic cards are just bigger at every drop, that to me seems like it kind of tips the scale in their favor. But what we have here with Krychek is not bigger stats at every drop. We've got this front-loaded gunman package, which if you don't draw it early, for 3-4 Langleys late in the game, you might not have that many cards in your hand where it's even a concern. And so I do think the biggest threat to Quake is early game, a bunch of Langleys coming down as power-ups, or Langley coming down with a bunch of gunman power-ups and just chewing his hand apart and giving him no early game options. Otherwise, if that scenario doesn't play out, I think I slightly favor Quake. Mitch versus Justin. So Mitch was on Captain America and Justin is on Supreme Leader. Oh, interesting. I like that. Cap versus Evil Cap. That's a cool matchup. So what's going to happen here? I think the staying power of Supreme Leader is going to be put to the test against the turn right power of Captain America. If Mitch can get the greens early and he can get Captain America big enough early, I think Supreme Leader is going to have some trouble dealing with that. There are not now Gorgon is a clean answer to a big old Captain America. If Mitch invests a lot of resources into getting Captain America all pumped up early, and then Gorgon comes down and makes it so none of those power-ups do anything, that lets Justin slide an attack in there that wipes all the counters off of Mitch's Captain America, and now all of a sudden we got a fair fight. If Mitch is a little bit more judicious with how he plays those resources out and specifically only puts the greens on just enough to keep Cap a little bit beefy, but tries to play around a big swing turn and doesn't run through all of his resources until he's pretty sure that either the Gorgon that was in hand has been played or that Gorgon isn't in hand, I think he probably has the ability to edge this one out. So again, I think this is going to be a close match. I think this is going to come down to who has the stronger kind of mid-game presence. I think early game is up for grabs. Now, Peggy Carter early game is going to be real bad for Justin. If Mitch has the ability to get Captain America stunned and not take wounds, that is going to kind of take away one of the advantages that Supreme Leader has in the terms of his staying power. Big part of Supreme Leader is that you don't just have to deal with his HP pool, you have to deal with all these characters' HP pool. And if Captain America on Mitch's side can avoid taking some of those early game wounds through Peggy Carter, through Friend from Work, now all of a sudden maybe they're even in terms of the total number of wounding attacks that need to be done. And at that point, I think the Illustrated Universe is going to start to stumble. So very close. Maybe I give the edge to Mitch, I guess. Very, very tight one. That's a very tight matchup. And that is all of our completed round 3 matchups where we know what both sides of the matchup are going to be. Like I said before, I'm not going to go through the loser brackets till later. Maybe there will be another live stream today, depending upon if we get spoilers from Upper Deck and how late in the day they are. Last week, I definitely was a little on the burned out side, a little late in the day to come down and try to do the review, and I feel like maybe I was a little bit more negative than I needed to be. So if we have another day where there's going to be super late spoilers, that might get pushed until tomorrow. I don't know. We'll see.